So, authentication, there are two sides to the authentication problem. One is that the web server needs to authenticate itself to your browser. And then the second part of authentication is that the user authenticates to the website. So the first part of the server authenticating to your browser, that is based on certificates and so on. And we have talked about this in previous lectures. So what we are going to focus here is about user authentication, in particular, how a user authenticates to a website. Okay, and there are three basic mechanisms that are available. Okay, so the first mechanism is called HTTP authentication. The second one is called cookie authentication, which is the most common, and we will understand that in some detail. And then the third approach is what is called the hidden form field-based authentication. So HTTP authentication is something that's part of the HTTP protocol itself. And basically, you can use the protocol provides a way to send username and password as part of the HTTP request in special header fields. So it is not something that is commonly used anymore. It was in use much more in the early days of the web. So cookie-based authentication is, as I said, the most common. So you get a web page where you enter your login credentials, namely your username and password. And then the server checks the credentials, and then it sets a cookie that identifies the user and the fact that the user has successfully logged in. Okay, and once this cookie is set, the browser is going to send back this cookie to the server with each request. So the cookie can be used by the server to confirm that the user has already authenticated themselves. So instead of using a cookie to send back this kind of information, the server can also use what is called a hidden form field, right? So a hidden form field is like any other form field, except that it is has this attribute called hidden, which means that it's not going to be actually shown in the page, and therefore it's basically going to be sitting there. And when you submit the form, then like other form fields, the hidden form field is also going to be included, but the user is not going to see this, and therefore the user is not going to actually be distracted by this information which the user doesn't really understand, because it's just some looks like a random string. So instead of maintaining this information using a cookie, you can also maintain it using a hidden form field. But once again, this is not very common. So the cookie-based authentication is shown here. So first, the user visits the website, which may involve, say, clicking on some link, and the browser then sends a GET request to the server, and the server returns back a page, which is the login form. And then looking at this form, the user enters the username and password, and typically this information is sent to the server using a POST request. And when the server receives this POST request, it checks the username and password, and if it checks out, then it creates this cookie, and then it includes the set cookie as part of the header with the page that's returned. And then the browser is going to take this cookie and store it. And anytime the browser, again, gets another page from the server, it's going to automatically send back this cookie, and that way the server can check that the user has already logged in, and based on that logged in information, it can serve up this page too, which may contain user-specific information on that page. Okay, so once again, these cookies need to be sent back and forth because, as we said before, HTTP is a stateless protocol, and therefore the authentication information needs to be maintained in a cookie that's sent back and forth. Okay, so that's how authentication is done. Now, once you have these cookies, you need to wonder, how long are these cookies remembered? So there are two types of cookies. One is called a temporary cookie, whose lifetime is until the browser is shut down. So when you exit the browser, it's nothing to do with exiting the window on which you are logged in. It's about exiting the browser application. And when you exit the browser application, then the temporary cookies are going to be forgotten. But then there are also cookies called persistent cookies. So it's more common for login information to be stored using persistent cookies. In fact, you would be hard pressed to find any website which uses a temporary cookie to cache, to store login information. Instead, it's going to do that using persistent cookies. And these persistent cookies have an expiry date, and they're going to be stored on by the browser until the expiry date is reached. So this is for cookie authentication. For HTTP-based authentication, then those authentication credentials are going to be forgotten automatically when you exit the browser. And once again, as we said before, it depends on the browser instance. It's not about whether the original window is open or not. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this unit.